I mean, I'm mixing nitromethane and alcohol at like 13 years old.
That seems
Right?
safe.
That's the way I grew up.
What's up, everybody? Brian Wagner, editor of Street Muscle Magazine, back with another episode of the Spare Parts Show. And this time I've got Mr. Mike Copeland on the show with me. And Mike, like we were just discussing this a little bit earlier. One of my coworkers said, I know Mike's done a lot of cool stuff and I'll probably learn something along the way. So I'm super stoked to have you on the show because I bet you've got tons of fun stories that you can tell and probably a whole lot you can't tell about fun things you've done in the automotive industry.
Well, I'm an old guy, so I've been at this a while. The good part about the stories is I've gotten old enough now that I really don't care about keeping secrets.
Nice.
So, and there's plenty of those from my GM days. So,
Statute of limitations has expired, right?
yeah, they've gone through enough people that most everybody I worked with is gone now. So I don't have to protect the innocent anymore.
Or protect the non-innocent, right?
Well, that could be that too. So
Depends on what side of the story they're on, right?
exactly.
So let's start at ground level here, man. Like I said, you've got a really cool story about what you've done. Kind of, let's start out. How did you start out and make your mark in the automotive performance aftermarket fun industry?
Well, so I'm like a lot of people, I think, from my era, right? I'm 67, so I've been doing this a long time. I grew up, my dad was a street racer and a hot rodder. He was service manager in a Ford dealership. I mean, my youngest memories are street racing on Telegraph. My dad had a 64 Ford with a 427 dual quad, 4-speed convertible car. And I remember my sister, my mom, my dad, and myself in that driving to the east side of Detroit to visit my grandparents. And we would be on Telegraph, and my dad would get in street races all the time. I mean, that was just what we did. I remember going out and standing on the shoulder of the road with my mom and sister while my dad street raced people.
True family experience, to say the least.
Coming home in reverse, my dad would build like a 54 Ford with a 427 in it and a 4-speed, and he would break all the forward gears. So we would come home, about 10 miles in reverse, driving through subdivisions and stuff to get home. I mean, those are the memories I grew up with.
That's awesome.
The first time I ever saw a 64 GTO, a 389 Tripar car, we were street racing on Telegraph. And I remember my dad would take off burning rubber, jam shift and all that. And usually around second gear, I would kind of climb up and look out the window to see how far ahead we were. I mean, nobody wore seatbelts in those days and everything. And I remember the GTO was beside him instead of behind him. And I thought, well, there's something special here. And, that, like I say, that's how I grew up.
It's amazing you grow up doing that, being around the automotive culture and how it ingrains with you. And when you're around it that much, honestly, I don't know of anybody that grew up around it that ever left it. You know what I mean? In some way.
Yeah, I've said forever, if there was a pill that would cure my automotive addiction, you couldn't get that thing near me for love nor money. My wife would like me to take it sometimes.
Force fed.
Yeah, force fed. She'd slip it in my food or something. But I mean, it probably 5 years old, 4 or 5 years old, my dad would have me put my hand up in the door of a car and hold a nut so he could put a window regulator in. My dad worked in the garage at night, worked in the dealers during the day. Same kind of path I followed. I mean, I grew up a hot rodder.
So you grew up as a hot rodder, you kind of follow different paths. I've been able to kind of find my way somehow into this media gig, which is, totally mind blowing to me. You kind of went a different path and did a lot more of the builder related stuff. Kind of talk about some of the cool stuff that you've built and kind of what you did at GM. Because I know you've built some cars that I don't think a lot of people realize who actually was a part of that.
Okay. So, well, I mean, I got married really young. I was 19. My wife was 18. I had the car addiction well before that. When we got married, I had a Mustang 2 that I drove, V8 car. and I had a 74 Maverick with a Boss 351 in it and a 4-speed. I put 13 motors in that car in a year. I originally had a small block in it. It was the first supercharged application I ever did. I had a Paxton blower on it. I didn't know enough, and I didn't have enough money to buy the good parts. So I would put together a cast piston 302 and try and leave the line at 8,800 with it and shift at 8,000. And the oil pan wasn't strong enough. Parts would fall out. I mean, I used to tear the synchros out of transmissions. I ran top loaders, and I would rip the ring gears apart on 9-inch Fords. I would break axle shafts. I was learning, right? So I kind of grew up that way. I went to work in the dealer, a Ford dealer, when I was 17. I got out of school early and went to work at a Ford dealer and was an apprentice mechanic and worked my way up. I mean, I always had hot rods. My wife and I kind of had a deal that I would get to take the income tax refund to work on my hot rod. And
fair enough.
So I would build that. And then at some point later in the year, I would always have to sell it to buy a new washing machine or fix the stove or whatever the case was, put carpet in the living room. Had kids young. When I tell you we were poor, we were poor. I mean, I used to work in the dealer, and then I would come home when we first got married, and we would roll pennies to buy baby formula. As time went on, I'd work in the dealer all day long, then drive home, eat some dinner, go out in the garage and work every night on side jobs till 11, 12 at night. Did that 6 days a week so that we could live. And then, time, if you work hard and you keep, get a little bit of luck, you can continue to kind of climb the ladder. I was 28 years old. I'd been running Ford dealerships, the service department. I became a service manager at 21. So I did that for a number of years. Decided I wanted my own place. So I went to work for a really big 13-bay independent to learn. I knew Fords in and out, but I didn't know GMs. I didn't know, Mopars. I hadn't had experience. Well, this place was a auto repair. The owner was a big Corvette guy. So he had a huge Corvette following. I learned so much working on Corvettes, so much working on the Mopars, so many hot rods, as well as just general repair. They also had a marine division. So I was that hot rodder, and I started building boat engines. So we built offshore boats. We built, jet boats, drag boats, all of that. I was building 468 cubic inch twin turbocharged big block Chevys, putting a pair of those in a 38-foot Scarab and going out and setting them up on the water, dialing them all in. I mean, that was my everyday, right? So I was just about ready to open my own place, and GM came along. So GM offered me a job as an experimental assembler.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
It was. I was one of the guys that hand built the prototypes and the future cars. So I worked for Cadillac, did the Elantes, did the first ever, 4.5 Cadillac engine, the first ever North Star. There were some Lotus inspired engines in between that ultimately got replaced with the North Star, twin overhead cam stuff. Worked on all of that, built the cars, drove them, built we were doing a competitor to the Mercedes back then. And so we built a Cadillac Seville around 88. And it was an all fiberglass body with a tube chassis, a roll cage, and a 500 cubic inch big block Chevy in it to simulate kind of where the AMG Mercedes were and stuff. And did cool stuff like that, because I was a hot rodder and everybody knew it. So there was a number of us inside GM, and we would kind of get the guys that get the nod to go do something different, right? I mean, we worked on so much crazy stuff. We did engines that didn't have valves. They had rotating camshafts with openings in them that would let air and fuel in when the camshaft opening opened to the port. I mean, we did so many odd things. Most of it never made it to production. Some of it did, right? So working on stuff like that, at GM, I went into education and training. I was teaching people, teaching technical skills, teaching interpersonal skills, all those kinds of things. Continued to climb the ladder, ended up in management, ran the electrical and then final vehicle at the Great Lakes Technology Center for about 4 years, doing, the first evers and all the future cars, the future programs. We were working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, forever. I had multiple years with Christmas Day off, and that was it.
Wow.
Because otherwise we worked. I was living 75 miles from work. I would leave the house at 4:45 in the morning and would get home at 8 o'clock at night, 7 days a week.
Oof, that's some
Right?
hours.
I came home one time and realized that my son was 3 inches taller than he was the last time I'd seen him. I mean, my wife basically had to raise him. She had to do everything. In that time frame, we built a new house that was only 35 miles from work, so cut my drive in half. But I was doing all that. Ended up getting transferred to a group in GM called Advanced Vehicle Integration. So in Advanced Vehicle Integration, our specialty was if there was a new engine or there was a new suspension design or whatever it was, a new car, my group was the ones that got the nod to do it. We were off site, so we didn't have to deal with all of the internal with GM, all of the people nosing around what you were doing and everything. We were in a restricted building that others couldn't get into, so that worked pretty well. That was we built like the C5 Corvette when there was no C5, right? When GM said there was not going to be a Corvette, we had built one and had one done when they turned the program on. Everybody thought it was a Camaro because it had a Camaro body, but it was really a Corvette. And the only way you can tell, there's some pictures of it out there. The fuel fill door is right behind the driver door. Instead of being back in the quarter panel, that's the only way you could tell what it was. And only those of us that knew, right?
Yeah.
So built that car, built the first ever Pontiac Solstice, did all the electrical system and everything in the first generation Chevy Colorado. Did V6, the high feature V6 when it was coming about. I built 12 platforms, 12 different vehicle programs with that engine in it. We did V10 LSs. We did V12 North Stars. I built the first ever of all of those. I built at one point in time, I was working on 14 programs with 6 different countries. Every time the phone rang, you had no idea who it was, what language they spoke, anything.
So you guys were like legit the Area 51 of GM, where they were like, we kind of need this, maybe, and they just turn you guys loose to do whatever.
Yep, that was us. The first ever front wheel drive LS Impala we built. Our boss, who was the boss over our area, got promoted to be the chief engineer on the Impala front wheel drive program. And that was after they had gone away from the rear drive. So they had the SS and then that was gone. So he came to us and he said, I need you guys to build me a front wheel drive LS Impala SS out of the new version. So we did. I mean, we did things like we designed oil pans in-house for engine rotation and all of those things. I mean, we did all of that in-house. We developed all of the conversion to turn the engine sideways in the car, the intake manifold flip backwards. We would weld up the rear of blocks and then machine them to put a different bolt pattern in so we could run the 4T65 in it. I mean, we actually, one of the guys I worked with, who's a personal friend and works with me today in the hydrogen, he designed a brand new starter from that for that program, hand drew it on a sheet of paper, and then we machined it and made it. I mean, we had that level of expertise.
And I took this will date myself a little bit. My freshman year of college, I had to take a hand drafting class when I was still in computer engineering, which they finally now at Shawnee State University just retired the hand drafting class in this past year because it's all AutoCAD now. So that's from someone who has done hand drafting stuff before to do something like a starter may seem simple. Trust me, it's not.
Oh no. And this was all hand drawn
Yeah.
and then hand dimensioned. And then we didn't even CNC. We just went and machined the parts and made it. I mean, we had machinists that were on a level that I'll never forget. I was doing a little project and I needed to change the bolt pattern and outer diameter on hubs. Right? They were actually out of a front wheel drive car, and we had redesigned them and we're putting them in another application. And I went to him and I was a little intimidated by him. I mean, I'll be honest, this guy was such a machinist. And I told him what I needed done. And I go back to my office. In about 10 minutes, he comes in my office and he's carrying the part. And I'm thinking, oh man, my description wasn't good enough. So what do you need? And he hands me the part and it's hot. He's already finished it. Right?
Those old school machinist guys, they just like you said, they're wizards. They are wizards. That's the only explanation.
He came up with a way. We used to make a lot of our own suspension arms and a lot of that kind of stuff, right? You have to machine all the tapers in them. So he came up with the idea when you're machining a taper and you're using a tapered bit, it's almost impossible to not get a ridge. And a lot of the stuff we did, we were making out of 7075, which is an aluminum that is light like a 6061, but has strength characteristics of cast iron. So we made a lot of suspension arms and a lot of knuckles and those things out of 7075. He figured out that if you took a pair of cotton work gloves and cut the finger off of one of them and stuck the finger on the tapered tool, it would cut a perfect taper without leaving a ridge in it.
How do you even come up with how?
I have no idea, right? But I mean, when you get to work with people like that, when you get to work with engineers that can hand draw a starter, when you get to learn from those guys, it raises your game so far. I mean, I was a little cocky. I mean, I was young. I accomplished a lot before I went to GM, even inside GM, right? I mean, I never went to work in a group that within a month, I didn't run the damn thing. I mean, it was, I just knew more. I had done more. I had more experience. I had more background. That was just who I was. And when I went into that department, advanced vehicle integration, I felt like a beginner. We had a suspension guy that was on a level. He designed probably 80% of the suspensions in GM for probably 20 years.
Cool.
One time I asked him a question about a suspension geometry issue. It was about 30 seconds he was drawing on a whiteboard, and I didn't even know what he was drawing. I mean, he was so far above me. But I made it a point to learn from them guys, and I learned from every one of them. And they made me so much better.
It's the old saying, there's a reason why you got 2 ears and one mouth, right?
That's it. But I mean, in that department, I did programs like the first ever CTSV. I built the first ever ZL1 Camaro. I built the first ever Pontiac Solstice. I built the first of all of these programs, right? And it was a team effort. It wasn't me alone, but I was the person responsible. So, you always rally the troops and get the right people, and they create magic if you give them what they need and get out of their way. So I got to do all those things. My department, they came to me one time. I got a phone call about 7:00 in the morning. I was walking I was working in Milford. I had an office in Milford and an office in Warren. And I was walking in, and it was the boss. And he said, I'd been gone for a week on vacation. I'd just come back. And he said, where are you at? And I said, just walking into Milford. He said, go back out and get in your car. I need you in Warren this morning, as fast as you can get here. Okay. So I went out, got in the car, drove to Warren. the tech center, went into, I had an office there too. And so I went in there and the boss was there. He said, we've been challenged to build a program. He said it has some very, very difficult, if not impossible, VTS specs, which are vehicle technical specifications, which are the requirements. And he said it came from the top that they want this built and it's your program. It was the Hot Rod Solstice. So I built that car and it had technical specs like it had to run 10-second quarter miles. It had to pull more than 1G lateral. It had to run 0 to 60 in under 4 seconds. It had to run 0 to 100 to 0 in under 14 seconds. So they had targeted like some of the best, and they let's say that some of them had been improved, the AC Cobra 427 times and all that kind of stuff. So we set about building a Pontiac Solstice, the first ever LS. But because we had designed the car in my group and we were a bunch of hot rodders, we had package protected in the design of that car that a LS would fit in it. So I already knew it would.
Future proofing, right? Future proofing. Yep.
So we built a 427 LS, took a Tremec 6-speed out of a CTSV and converted it to fit in the car. There were inside GM, we were splitting CTSV differentials in half when we turned the power up. So we built a cast iron version of that, and there were 2 that had ever been built, and I got one of those for that Solstice. So we built that car, all carbon fiber body, except for the quarter panels, but the rest of the car was carbon. We started out at 2886 with a 4-cylinder. When we finished that car, it didn't have air anymore. It still had a radio. It had a defroster for the windshield, but it didn't have a ventilation system. It had a removable hard top, not the soft top anymore, but with a 427, with a 6-speed Tremec, with the cast iron rear diff, with 14-inch rotors, 6-piston Brembos, Olin shocks, all billet, knuckles, control arms, everything. It weighed 2864.
That's a nasty car.
The car was brutal fast. I mean, brutal fast. We took it, we broke every technical spec that had been written for the car. We ran 10.9 with the car on street tires on 30-degree asphalt. It pulled 1.05 G lateral on street tires, 1.31 G lateral on road race tires. We took it out and tested it. We went out into Arizona to test it out there. And we run full fuel loads out of that car. So it had a 16-gallon cell in it at race speeds. I mean, it would run 0 to 100 to 0 in 12.7 seconds.
So it took an absolute beating, to say the least.
Oh, yeah. And it was so much fun to drive. I mean, without a top on it, if you wound it up and turned it loose, it made so much tire smoke, it would fill the interior compartment and you couldn't see.
It's like a go-kart with a V8.
It was. The car was so much fun. But I built the development car for the World Challenge Cadillac CTSV program. So we worked 27 hours straight to finish that in time to go to Arizona and test it. We left Arizona, went to Canada to Moss Sport and put it on the track. They ran the race, the actual World Challenge race on Sunday. We were there on Monday and we broke the track record and were faster than the #1 qualifying car in our first test session.
That's got to be a good feeling when you literally create something out of nothing and it turns out that good.
It is, right? But realize, again, I had every tool known to man at my resource. I had some of the smartest designers, some of the best engineers, some of the best fabricators that existed, right? I mean, these guys, they had more talent with these people than most people ever get an opportunity to work with.
See, that to me is just that's what makes doing something like that so much fun, when you get to work with a team where you're doing off the chart stuff and you have people that can make it happen. That's when you, like you said, you reach that different level.
Yeah. Well, and you get to learn from that, right? And it raises your bar of what you're capable of doing. Okay. So I built Project X, the 57 Chevy that belongs to Hot Rod now. I was the guy inside GM that did that car. So, but we brought that car in and we did things like we scanned an original 57 chassis. The one that was in that car was all butchered up. So I found one local and bought it, a perfect California chassis, and we scanned it. So we created that entire chassis in math, right? And at a computer, we sat down, took a Corvette front cradle assembly and all of the suspension, narrowed it to fit the car, designed all of it, engineered all of it, and then just went out and made the parts. I had access to everything, right? So I needed a steering gear. I needed to work in reverse rotation of the Corvette because the Corvette's a rear rack and we needed a front rack. I needed it to be able to operate, and they operate exactly opposite. And it needed to be narrow, right? Because I had access to all of the data inside GM. We went in and looked at every steering rack that we made and found a Chevy Colorado truck rack would work in that if I narrowed each end 1 inch, right?
Go to the database and go to the picture. I just picture this giant like warehouse full of parts bins, and you're like, I'll take one of those, two of those, throw a couple in there, we'll cut those up and make something out of them.
Yes, in some cases, yeah. I mean, I had rooms full of parts. So but we did that car, did the suspension, the rear suspension in that car. My wife has a 72 Chevelle SS. It's a all aluminum 508-inch big block. It's a cool car. And the Chevelles were wheel hop in the 69, 68 through whatever, right? So I had spent a lot of time redoing the rear suspension in her car. And I'd come up with a system. Literally, you can turn the clutch loose at any point. It just plants the tires. It'll smoke them as long as you want to stay in the pedal. But there's no wheel hop. There's no anything that it does stupid, right? No wonky at all. So I brought my wife's Chevelle into work and we put it up on a hoist and took out the roamer, which is we collect data points with it. And we collected all of the data points in the rear of my wife's Chevelle of what I had created out of it, took all of those data points, loaded them into math. Then we compensated them for the difference in the center of gravity and the arm length, and designed the rear suspension in Project X off of that data. So it was really a copy of my wife's, but it's a triangulated 4-link. There's a video and a photo that showed up. They still use a photo some of Project X doing a massive smoker burnout, right? Johnny Hunkins took that photo. I was driving. We were at the Desert Proving Grounds out in Arizona. That was the first burnout I'd ever done with that car. And it was 3.5 minutes long at 6,000 RPM in second gear.
That sounds like that was a little excessively fun.
Johnny just, he said, I'll tell you when to stop. And he must have took 500 photos, but he was laying on the ground in front of the car. And I did those burnouts.
I mean, if you got the time to get the shot, get the shot.
The side moldings on that car, on the quarter, a 57 has that. We CNC'd those out of 7-foot long pieces of 6061.
Whoa.
The inserts actually have the X logo, and we laser etched the logos, small X's, into sheets of aluminum, and then hand formed them to fit the quarter panels, and then CNC machined the moldings, the front, the defender, the door, and then the quarter panel on both sides of the car, and then duplicated it on the inside on the trim panels. So they mimic the outside.
That's a lot of fabrication. That's a
The
lot of impressive fabrication.
the
Wow.
rear fender wells in the car, we put tubs in it because it'll hold basically a 31 1450 tire. So one of my guys handmade those, made a wood tool and took sheet metal and hand hammered those wheel tubs out of them.
Oof.
Right. The hood, I came up with the idea to integrate the air filter into the hood. And I wanted to use the hood bumps on a 57 as the ram air intake to feed that air filter. And then when you close the hood, it came down on the engine. And that's how you fed air to the engine. Right. So I came up with the idea. I wanted to do that. It was an all aluminum 427. I did all the math to calculate air volumes and what I needed. I bought a hood. They actually stamped the parts to make those hoods in Detroit. And I knew the company, and I knew the guy that owned it. So he sold me a hood completely disassembled. And I sat down with two of my guys and used literally a piece of scrap paper and drew what I wanted that hood to be. They made a wood tool and then laid the hood in it and hand hammered those scoops had to be an inch wider on each side. So 2 inches wider per side and an inch taller. And they hand formed those in that hood.
That's again, it's when you have people that can do stuff at that level, it makes it possible. I mean, that's really the only way you can do it.
Absolutely. And we worked under timelines that most people would never even dream of.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Then you got
I
that.
think Project X we built ground up, I mean, chassis, body, everything in about 8 weeks.
That's flying. That is flying.
We did a car called the Flexfuel Coupe, a 34 Chevy. We actually debuted Project X and Flexfuel Coupe at SEMA the same year. The Flexfuel Coupe had a turbocharged Ecotec in it that ran on E85. We handmade the chassis. We bought a body, but then cut it all apart because it was a fiberglass body and it was all made wrong. It was a real 34 Chevy, but the two sides were different. The cowl was different on each side. We cut that all apart, remade the cowl. We suicided the doors. At one point in time, I mean, we made every part in that car. At one point in time, I had five-axis CNC machines running, making parts for that car.
Again, the old timelines to like make something like that happen is just they're so tight, and you really have to be precise on what you're doing.
Yeah. Most people don't know, but the door handle is different on a 34 Chevy than it is a 34 Ford. A 34 Ford has a sweep in it, and a 34 Chevy is straight. I needed door handles. So it was 10:30 on Saturday night, and I found a place that had them in Australia. So I called them. It was 8:30 Monday morning in Australia.
Yeah, I was gonna say the time difference.
And the guy was eating breakfast. And he answered his phone because he saw a number that he didn't recognize. So I called him and said, "You got a set of these?" He said, "Yep." I said, "I need them." And he said, "Okay." He said, "I can ship them to you." I said, "Here's the challenge." I realized Saturday night, 10:30. I said, "I need them in Detroit on Tuesday." Then, just to make matters more fun, they had a strike, a wildcat strike at the tech center. And all material handling was done by represented people. So they wouldn't accept anything. They wouldn't accept any material coming in. They wouldn't deliver it to the buildings. So basically it was shut down. So I had them delivered to a friend of mine's house that lived, his dad's house, who lived about 5 miles from the tech center. And I went there and got them on Tuesday.
I was gonna say that this sounds like one of those deals where someone was carrying on as a carry-on on an airplane. I've seen guys do that with drag racing parts at an event. Like it, just take it as a carry-on and go.
Yeah. I built the Woodward GTO, which was a wide body GTO with a 427 LS. First time we'd ever done dual mass airflow sensor intakes and that kind of stuff. So I did that car. I did the E-Rod 55 Chevy. So the first ever E-Rod engine, it's a green and white 55 Chevy. I built that car. that one we did a lot of unique things. I worked with a designer a lot named Dave Ross. And Dave was a big hot rodder, had a blown Pro Street 57 Chevy. He worked on most all of the projects I did. We built the Reggie Jackson Camaro together. That was the first ever LSX. We did, I mean, there were so many cars, just, oh God, what else did I do? I did the crate motor shootout car where we ran 8 engines in one car. So I bought a 69 Chevelle, a real SS 396 car out of a barn about 60 miles north of Detroit. We tore it all down, built it, stripped it, of course, blasted it, cleaned it, did a suspension design for it. It was still a triangulated 4-link Chevelle based in the rear, put on a 10.5-inch tire. Went to, I rented 131 Dragway, had a team, 5 of us, 5 guys plus myself that went there. We did 7 engine swaps, 6 torque converters, 4 rear axles, and over 120 quarter-mile runs in 4 days.
Jesus, that's something you can't, like, my little squirrel brain can't, like, it's just error. It can't fathom that.
Yeah. So it was a yellow 69 Chevelle. It was on the cover of Hot Rod. It's the largest story ever run in Hot Rod magazine at 20 pages.
I'd say with that many engine swaps.
It was on the cover of Hot Rod magazine with the GM Performance Parts logo on the windshield.
So is there any, like, is there a, like, just someone came to you with this, like, fever dream concept of a vehicle that just made you go, I don't know about that? Or was it always just, oh yeah, we can make it happen? Like, what's the one that just made you kind of stop you in the tracks and go, you want me to do what?
Truthfully, there's not one. There hasn't been. I did the first ever, I did all the design and engineering work for the Copeland Camaro program, the latest one, the new gen, the 5th gen, 6th gen car. I did the 5th gen car. I did, to do what I did inside GM, you had to live like 2 steps past the edge of the razor blade. I mean, GM has a million rules. Every big corporation does. The head of financial told me one time that I just didn't understand the requirements because I didn't follow any of the rules. And I told him I knew the rules explicitly. That's how I got around them. I mean, I was told one time that when I failed, when I was doing the crate motor shootout car, they told me, when you fail, this will end your GM career. I told them, when I succeed, don't show up for the pictures. There were so many of those, right? Those are the kind of stories you could never tell if all those people were still there and everything else. It was a different time, and it was but you couldn't do what I did. My record for the SEMA build is 4 days.
Oh, wow.
And that was a painted basic shell bolted onto a frame when it arrived, and we drove it into the car hauler to take it to SEMA, and it was 4 days.
That sounds like that took a lot of nicotine and caffeine to make happen.
It was not uncommon in my world to go to work on Tuesday and come home end of day Thursday. I mean, that was our world, right?
Yeah.
And that was just what we did.
So I guess, how does a hardcore GM guy turn into building like modern Hemi cars? Like, how did that happen?
Well, it even goes one step back from that. I grew up a hardcore Ford guy.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I grew up in a Ford house. I mean, Chevys were the enemy, right? And I had a whole fleet of Fords. I think at this point I've had more than 400 cars. And I mean, I love cars. And so I grew up a Ford guy. My first car was a 70 Torino GT convertible 429. It was my mom's, and she got hit. She was driving home from work, and somebody hit her in the back end and drove her into another car. So the insurance company totaled it. My dad bought it back, and he and I fixed it.
That's a rare car.
Yeah. So here's a fun story. I'll tell it as brief as I can. I had that Torino. My dad and I fixed it. I was 14 years old when I got it. So I would go to school every day. And then I was in junior high. So I lived about 4 blocks from the school, 4 or 5 blocks from the school. I would run home every day in the summer. My parents both worked, so there was just my sister and I at the house. And I would come home and open the garage and back that Torino out in the driveway, put the top down. When all the other kids were coming home to school, I would do burnouts in the driveway and then put it in the garage, put the top up, put it back in the garage, and then go out and scrub the driveway to get all the rubber off the driveway so my dad wouldn't know what I was doing when he got home. Right?
Racing the Evans, smart man.
So I had that Torino, and my cousin wanted to buy it. He was older than I was. And my dad asked what I thought about it. Well, I was mowing lawns and I was shoveling snow in the winter to make money. Realized I was only 14 years old. And I went to the local auto parts store because I wanted to hop the Torino up. And I asked them how much for a set of headers. And Hooker was the only company that made them. And if my memory's right, in 1970, so that would have been about 71, 72, they were like $150. And I thought, that's all the money in the world. How will I ever make $150? Right? And I don't want to leave it stock. So my dad said, what do you think about selling it? I said, okay, sell it. So he sold it to my cousin, who ultimately totaled it and scrapped it out. But the day I turned 15, I signed up for driver's ed. And they didn't have, I couldn't get in the school one. So I took private driver's training at 15 in one day. So it basically took about a month to get through driver's training. And I had a permit. So I had a learning permit for 11 months before I turned 16. So I had a motorcycle and I got a special restricted license so I could ride it on the street. And it was a 185 and it had to be 125 or smaller. So I went and bought a 125 tag and put it on it. And, all of that kind of stuff, right? But I'm like 15 and a half. And my dad says, it's time for us to get you another car. It's time to take the money from the Torino and get you a car. Now, my dad ran the service department in a Ford dealer. So my mom and I get in her car and we drive down there one night after work. And I drive, of course, because I want to drive every time I can. And my dad's got 3 cars lined up for me to look at. First one, 1969 Boss 429 Mustang.
Ooh.
And it has 18,000 miles on it. And the motor's noisy. The guy thinks the motor's bad, but it just needs the valves adjusted. And that one was $1,800. So then he takes me down to the body shop, and the guy that works there has got a car, 67 Corvette convertible, 427 4-speed car that needs paint for $1,000. And he'll paint it for $500.
Wow.
So then he takes me up to the showroom, and the third car is a brand new Pinto.
Oh boy.
2000cc automatic. And my dad, looking in hindsight, he was really smart. He kind of helped convince me to take the Pinto. Now, you got to realize at this point, I'm 15 years old. For 4 years, I've been a professional mini bike racer with full factory sponsorships. My wildest bikes had twin engines on them with 1/2-inch stroker crankshafts in them, billet connecting rods, billet pistons, custom ground camshafts that ran on nitromethane and alcohol. We ran a 1/2-mile track with 13 turns in it, was my local track. I've been all over the country racing. I've raced against the best everywhere. I mean, I'm mixing nitromethane and alcohol at like 13 years old.
That seems safe.
That's the way I grew up. The minute I got in it, right? It didn't matter. I had, we would gear the mini bikes and stuff. I had 80-mile-an-hour mini bikes. I came off one time at 45 miles an hour leading a race and landed. It tore all the skin off of both arms from the shoulders to the wrists, the legs from the knees to the ankles, and a patch about 8 or 10 inches on my side. It ground all the skin off.
Oh,
right. So my parents took me to the doctor. Now, that was the week before the World Championships. My parents took me to the doctor and he gave me an ointment so I didn't get any scabs. I just had to smear this stuff on and I had to stay active. So I rode my bike everywhere and everything for the week. We went out to test on Thursday night before the Friday start of the racing for the weekend. And my dad didn't say anything then. He told me later he thought I would never ride again, because when I came off and landed and skidded down the front stretch, I was leading the field and every other bike had to drive around me at speed when I flipped. So, I mean, I think there was 8 bikes in the class. So 7 other bikes and riders, I jumped over one of them. So he thought I would probably never ride again, because that's pretty traumatic, right? So I rode 7 classes, 3.5, 4, and 5 horse stock, 3.5, 4, 5 horse modified, and then open class. I went out to test on my 3.5 horse stock, and I broke the track record on my second lap. I was as wild as they come. Right.
At that point, he probably said, "Yeah, I think he's good. He's back in the saddle."
Yeah. So if I had bought the Corvette or I had bought the Boss 429, I know I would have totaled them and I probably would have killed myself.
Yeah, that's distinctly possible.
Right. So, but I got the Pinto. Of course, we didn't leave it stock long. It had a 12-to-1 pistons in it, had a custom grind camshaft, had a CJ Batten ported cylinder head on it. It had a gear in it. It ran 1550s with a 2-liter at the track. And then I sold that. I got a new 73 Mach 1 with a 351 HO. Drag raced that some. It wasn't fast enough. Decided I wanted to go faster, and then I got the Maverick. The rest has been history. I mean, I just been, more and more and more. But started as a Ford guy, went to GM, converted the fleet. When I retired from GM, I went to work at Lingenfelter. So I built a truck for Lingenfelter that they did for GM that was at SEMA in 2010. It was the first ever E-Rod 5.3. So it was a 55 Chevy pickup truck on a Trailblazer SS chassis with an E-Rod 5.3 in it. So we built that at Arrington, or at Diversified, my other company, before I owned Arrington. So we built that at Diversified. That was a ground up build in 10 weeks. And we ran the regular business of the company. We put 1,700 hours in that truck in 10 weeks.
That's grinding on something. That is absolutely grinding.
And we drove it into SEMA.
It's, what's the vehicle that you have built that is just, the one that really stands out in your mind, that was just after GM, that you've built that just was absolutely mind blowing to you, that you're like, how do we pull this off?
Yeah. The Rampage. My mid-engine Gen 3 Hemi stack injected Rampage. I love that little truck. I mean, I had been looking to build a mid-engine something for a long time, right? I wanted to compete in autocrosses. I wanted to run Optima. I wanted to run some Good Guys events. I wanted to do those kinds of things, right? Now, I don't get to do enough of it, right? Because I'm always working. So I don't get to do that kind of stuff. And so, but I wanted to build a car that was better than I was. So I figured if I can't be that good, let's build a really good car, and then an amateur can do okay in it. So I had this mid-engine car rolling around in my head for a long time. I saw Rampage. When I bought Arrington, I took 14 trips to Virginia to bring all of the inventory and the equipment and all that stuff back to Michigan. And there was a barbecue place where I ate lunch, and there was an abandoned Rampage sitting in the parking lot. And I kept seeing that and seeing that. And I thought, you know what? That would be cool. So I went online, found the original body dimensions for a Rampage. And so I laid it all out. I knew it would fit. And I went about finding a Rampage. But we built that car here at Diversified, built the engine at Arrington. From the day we pulled it in the shop until the day we drove it into the car hauler to take it to SEMA, we made the chassis. I took a factory 5 GTM chassis and cut the 2 suspension clips out of it. And then we made the rest of the chassis. We made all the flares. We made all the panels. We made everything else. Body, paint, wiring, interior trim, everything, start to finish, 10 weeks.
What was your team's reaction when you went to them and said, listen, I want to take a Rampage and put a Hemi in it, but it's got to be mid-engine and we've got 10 weeks to do it? Do they just look at you like you're on drugs?
No. Most of my guys at that point, the guys, we've had some turnover, but they've gone off to do their own thing. And I guess that's the ultimate, reward if one of your people does that, right? Or some of your people do that. And, but they had worked with me long enough to know that, I lived in that world. That's the way we operate. That's what we do. The prior year, we had built a 69 Charger that came out of paint. And from having a painted body, we had to build an entire Charger body because it was rusted away so bad, but not sanded and wheeled, just out of paint. From the moment I pulled up behind the shop here with it on my car trailer until we drove it in a car hauler to go to SEMA was 8 days.
Ooh, paint's barely dry.
Hellcat, 8-speed automatic, all custom one-off leather interior, carbon fiber one-off dash console. We made the hood. We made everything for that car.
That's
Riley Motorsports suspension.
I just think about what it takes to do just basic stuff, and the fact that you guys crank stuff out that fast is just at that level it's truly amazing. It really is.
Well, it's good people, right? And a commitment, right? We work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's what it takes to do that kind of stuff, right?
And you got to love to do it. That's at that point, it's not work.
It's a passion.
Yeah.
Now, the Rampage, I had kind of made a deal with my wife because coming into SEMA when I was at GM for 2 months, I would work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. So I'd always made a deal with her that on Thursday before SEMA starts, the Thursday before, every GM vehicle had to be on a truck headed for SEMA, for Vegas. So I made a deal with my wife that we would go on vacation, right? So I would just, basically work all night, come home, shower, dress, and we'd head for the airport. So we did that, went out there, did the whole SEMA deal. I had never sat in the Rampage because it didn't have seats when I left.
Nice.
We built the entire truck because we built it with the chassis and everything, and it fitted the body, pulled the body, sent it to paint, everything, getting the seats reupholstered and everything, showed up last minute. The seats wouldn't fit in it because the recliner handles for the seats, it has all carbon scat seats in it. And we reupholstered them all in leather and all that stuff. But we ended up having to swap them left to right to put the recliner handle on the inside where the tunnel is instead of the outside where the roll cage is. And so I had never sat in it. It got to SEMA. I drove it in. We'd already chassis dynoed it, and I had the guys set up. I gave them the alignment specs and everything, and they did that. We actually I pushed it into SEMA into the bay because I wasn't there at the moment the car got there. So they pushed it into the red line oil booth. It sat there all week. We did SEMA. I won a golden ticket to compete in Optima on Friday night. After we finished tearing the booth down, I climbed in the truck, fired it up. First time I ever sat in it. Drove it. First time I'd ever heard it run since it was finished. I mean, I'd heard it run when we dynoed it and did all that stuff. fired it up, drove it into Las Vegas traffic, drove it out to the 15 and went to Las Vegas Motor Speedway. Raced it all weekend, drove it 100 miles on the road rally to the Shelby Museum on Saturday night and back. Raced it on Sunday, ran the speed stop, ran the autocross, ran the road course, and drove it in a car hauler on Sunday night to ship it home.
All in one piece.
It did not have a mile when I left with it. My guys told me I was talking to them on the phone and they said, you can't race this. I said, this thing, I said, well, did you nut and bolt it? Yeah. I said, so nothing's going to fall off? He said, yeah, but we haven't done shock valves. We haven't done anything. I said, I'll take care of all that out here. I said, I'm going to race it. He said, you got to be crazy. And I raced it.
Crazy, fun, interchangeable, right?
Right. Anybody can do it if you got enough time.
So, as we wind things down here, I always like to ask my guests one fun question. So for you, Mike, our one fun question is going to be right now, if you went on Facebook Marketplace and wanted to buy something just off the wall to do for your next project, what would you look for? Like, a lot of times you go on Facebook Marketplace and kind of have an idea. What are you going to go on there? Like, what's going to be your search? What are you looking for?
Yeah. So I have a 69 Dart that we're about 3/4 through building. It's like a 1,700 horse twin supercharged Gen 3 Hemi in it. I have that. I have a few others sitting around that really I'm really not too fired up about. I have a bucket list of muscle cars I want to own. I want that Boss 429. I want a Hemi Cuda. There's a few of those cars. But to build right now for my next one.
Yeah, just something that's like, I want to build something that's like along that line of that Rampage, just going to make people go, well, that's different.
Yeah. So I'm an off-road guy as well. I got a Jeep with 1,000 horsepower blown LS in it, a Jeep Wrangler. And we sand race it up at the dunes. We got a place up at the dunes here in Michigan. It runs 300 feet in the sand in under 4.5 seconds.
Jeez. Why am I not surprised? Why?
So I kind of have this bug to go fast. I have an engine program. Dart's got a new block that they're coming out with. I helped them develop their new Hemi block. And I get the first 2 that come out of the mold. And I have all the parts to build one. It's going to be a 467 cubic inch twin turbocharged. And our target is 2,500 horsepower with it.
That's a nice little mill.
Yeah. I kind of want to have you seen the Factory 5 33 pickup truck that they do?
Yeah.
I kind of want to do one of those with that Hemi in it for the sand.
So another go-kart with, a windshield.
Yeah. With lots of motor. Yeah.
Man, you better put some extra some bosses up front to put some weight on the front of that thing, because it's going to want to flip over backwards even on the sand.
It'll spin the tire so hard it won't. That's the trick. You got to wind them up and turn the tire. You got to keep the tire spinning. It's like tire shake in a pro stock car. If you don't get enough tire speed, they'll shake.
Yeah.
It's the exact same deal in the sand. If you see one carrying the front end, it's not spinning the tires hard enough.
I was gonna say, I've seen some of those things carry some gnarly wheelies. So
yeah, they'll carry the tires, but if they go stupid high, that's because they don't have enough wheel speed.
They got to hit it with the purse, Nancy, right?
Yeah. If I run my Jeep full track, it's running 137 mile an hour wheel speed at about 100 miles an hour.
Oh.
So it's got 30 plus mile an hour of wheel slippage, front and rear, at 100 miles an hour.
That's a lot of wheel speed. Wow.
If they get loose, you can't snap the throttle because they'll flip over. If the tires grip, they'll flip. So if they get loose, you got to drive them out of it.
Wow. That sounds like a whole nother, that sounds like another conversation we could have about making poor decisions with one of those.
Yeah, but I love it, right? And my wife, I give rides. I mean, I have people that everybody wants to ride with me. My wife rides with me, and she will be pulling up, and like I'll be cruising around the dunes, climbing hills, and we head up. And she's like, "Are you going to race?" Yeah. Why do you have to race? I said, "Because it's me."
Yeah.
And we'll pull up there, and she calls it the oh shit handle. So she grabs the handle in front of her, and I got a 2-step in it with a trans brake and all that stuff. And I'll set it on the brake, and I leave on 16 pounds of boost. And so you'll motor down through there, and I get to the other end, and she's kind of like, oh shit, oh shit, oh shit. And as I'm slowing down, I get turned around to head back, and she'll say, are we gonna do it again? Are we gonna do it again? We're gonna
Absolutely.
do it again.
Well, Mike, on that note, I appreciate you coming on the show so much. Um, we'll catch up again in the future. Maybe I can try to scam a ride in that a Jeep at some point.
Anytime, man. We have a place up there. We go up there every chance we get.
I might have to hit you up on that.
Let's do it. So, and just like riding in a Jeep, we'll do this again.
Awesome. We'll talk to you soon, Mike.
Thanks, man.